Chapter 10 is on photosynthesis, and Chapter 10 is on photosynthesis. I would like to, first of all, we're assuming you've done the questions or are working on the questions. I'm going to assume that you use your textbook to help you with anything you need. I would like to use the textbook pictures as our notes now, mostly because I dislike the PowerPoints immensely. So let's start out by talking about photosynthesis just with the equation. I'm going to put a picture up that doesn't really mean anything right now, and then talk a couple things about it by writing on the screen. First of all, the chemical equation for photosynthesis is carbon dioxide plus water yields glucose plus oxygen. Now, this chemical reaction happens only with light as a catalyst. Okay? Now, what I want to do when we talk about photosynthesis is sort of break down where each of these go. Notice, this is the reverse reaction of cell respiration. Okay, cell respiration is the reverse reaction of photosynthesis. Here we have the input of energy. That makes this an endergonic reaction. We are storing energy in the form of glucose we're changing the energy of light, transforming the energy of light into the energy of glucose, and using these as our building blocks. It's a really important idea. Okay, so here on this slide, you can see that we're talking about, we'll come back to this, where photosynthesis happens. I want to go to a different slide to show you this. And to do that, I need to click out of this and go here. And let's go to this one. This is 10.5 in your book. Okay, inside of a plant cell, I'm making the assumption that you knew that plants did photosynthesis. Inside of a plant cell, this is an organelle called a chloroplast. Chloroplast. Now, there are two parts to the chloroplast that you'll read about. You'll read about the stroma of the chloroplast and the thylakoid membranes. Okay, just so if you recognize those terms, you just have to recognize those terms. I'm not going to ask you to regurgitate those on a test or anything necessarily. All right, so let's talk about the overview. Generally, there are two parts to the photosynthesis. There's what's called the light reactions and the Kelvin cycle. The light reactions in the Kelvin cycle. Notice that the light reactions use water and light as inputs. Output of the light reactions, ATP, and very similar to cell respiration, but with a P, NADPH, and I always remember that as photosynthesis, and the output of oxygen as a waste product, conveniently. We'll break that down in a minute. Energy, essentially, goes into the Kelvin cycle along with the input of CO2, and we use that energy, plants use that energy through the Kelvin cycle to build sugar molecules. Notice that another output of the Kelvin cycle are the oxidized forms of NADP and ADP, and they'll go back to pick up more electrons and bring them back again. So that's a general overview of photosynthesis. Okay, now what I want to do is talk about the light reactions and then the dark reaction, or then the Kelvin cycle. A quick review of light. Remember that light is part of what we call the electromagnetic spectrum of waves. Okay, it goes from gamma rays up to radio waves. Light is in the visible light that's visible to humans, is in this part of the spectrum when the waves go from 380 nanometers to 750 nanometers. That's not really that important, although you should know that then if you use a prism, you can break light up into its its wavelengths. We know that leaves are green. Leaves are green because they reflect green light. That means they absorb the other colors. And I can go and show you something called the absorption spectrum. Something called the absorption spectrum of, and we're going to look at this in more detail second semester actually. This is called the absorption spectrum of photosynthesis, or of chlorophyll, where it absorbs blue. This is absorption of light by plant pigments, or chloroplast pigments. Notice it absorbs the most in the reds and the blues, and really doesn't absorb anything in the greens, because it's reflecting them. So that's just a review of the energy of light, how light energy works. Okay, so in the light reactions, there are two what we call photosystems. There's photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. We'll come back to photosystem 1 in a minute and why they're named that. We're going to start with photosystem 2. This looks all very complicated. Okay, and I want to simplify this slide a little bit. This is figure 10-13. Inside of the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast, light hits a chlorophyll molecule, and it's showing all these arrows. You can pretty much ignore that and look at this part. When light gets to certain chlorophyll molecules, electrons here go to a higher energy level. Actually, they're released. We talked about this before with cellular respiration. Electrons are excited, and they go to an electron transport chain. Okay, so let me go back through the steps of this again by erasing my ink here. Okay, so that means that light comes in, electrons are excited, those electrons are dumped off into an electron transport chain, and just like in cellular respiration with oxidative phosphorylation, ATP is produced. Now there's a problem here, and that problem is that as light keeps hitting this chlorophyll and electrons keep being released, that means they would be lost. You will run out of electrons in a plant very soon. If you keep doing this, the plant's going to run out of electrons. However, a plant takes in water. Water is broken into 2 hydrogen ions and an oxygen, and its electrons are used to refill the electrons. Now that's a really interesting idea. So water is used by a plant to refill its electrons that it's losing when light hits it. So a plant dies. When a plant dies because of lack of water, the reason it has a lack of water is its chlorophyll's lost all its electrons. The reason it's dying is it doesn't have the ability to make ATP anymore. So the breakdown of water yields electrons to refill it. Now let's talk about photosystem 1 and why it comes second. Here's an overall view of photosystem 2 that we just talked about. And here over here is what's called photosystem 1. Photosystem 1 consists of chlorophyll that absorbs slightly different wavelengths of light. It's called photosystem 1 because it was figured out first. Photosystem 2 was figured out second. So the electrons from photosystem 2 go down an electron transport chain, and you probably wondered, because you're an advanced biochemistry student, where do they go? Well, they go into chlorophyll. This chlorophyll gets excited by light, sends out its electrons. Those electrons go down another electron transport chain, and they end up reducing NADP to NADPH, and so now this is an energy or electron carrier. Where is it going to carry them to? Well, as I showed you before, up here, it's going to carry that energy to something called the Kelvin cycle. So to review, light hits chlorophyll. It's hitting it both at the same time, right? I mean, it's the same plant. This one's losing electrons, NADPH. This one's losing electrons, ATP. From photosystem 2, the electrons end up in photosystem 1. From photosystem 1, the electrons end up in NADPH. To replace the missing electrons in photosystem 2, we use water as a breakdown product. There's an overview of the light reactions. Now let's talk about what happens to the ATP and the NADPH in the Kelvin cycle. Okay, this is figure 1018 in your book. It looks all very complicated. Okay, Kelvin cycle has a series of reactions. For you and for this class, we're going to make this pretty simple. What goes in? Well, a plant takes in carbon dioxide. How does it get it? Well, it takes it in through its leaves. There's little pores in the leaves called stomata. We'll talk about those in second semester. It takes in carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide has to be what's called fixed or converted to a form of glucose. In order to do that, that is going to require energy, correct? Because carbon dioxide has to be CO2, has to be, along with some water, has to be turned into that. Well, not really along with water in this case. The hydrogens are coming from this thing called NADPH. That's handy. Sorry about that. So the hydrogens are coming from this thing called NADPH. So, coming into the Kelvin cycle is CO2, one at a time. They go through the cycle. When carbon dioxide comes in, it gets put into a protein called rubisco. And the only reason I'm telling you that is because that would make it the most abundant protein in nature, because every plant, everything that does photosynthesis has rubisco. ATP from the light reactions, NADPH from the light reactions provide energy to put carbon dioxide plus some hydrogen together to make a sugar called G3P. G3P happens to be, if you put two of those together, you get glucose. Okay? Phosphoglyceraldehyde, I believe is the name. I screwed that up. I'm sorry, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. The phosphates are taken off, and you're left with a sugar. Okay? The cool thing about G3P is it can also become a protein, and it can also become a fat. Okay? It's sort of a building block of glucose and other organic compounds. So, basically in the Kelvin cycle, you have carbon dioxide in from the air, energy from the light reactions, and the output is a sugar. That's not so hard to remember. One other thing to talk about in regards to photosynthesis are two sort of strategies plants use, certain plants. Most plants take in carbon dioxide through their stomata and use it directly. Certain plants do it a different way. There are two kinds of specialized forms of plants that we're going to learn about, and we'll talk about these again second semester. C4 plants like sugarcane. Okay? Plants that live in a very hot, dry environment are called C4, well, or they do it a little differently, are called C4 plants. The best way to remember this is that C4 plants use space and CAM plants use time to take carbon dioxide from the air and they convert it into a different chemical and store it. C4 plants store it in a different cell, and they do that in case there are periods of drought. Because you can't convert CO2 into sugar without the energy of light and water. So in a period of drought, the plant stores carbon dioxide until it can use it later. It's called a C4 plant. I don't know how else to tell you except you got to memorize. C4 plants use space. CAM plants use time. CAM plants live in environments where it's very hot during the day, very dry sometimes during the day, although it doesn't look very dry here in the pineapple field. So CAM plants will open their stomata at night, take in carbon dioxide and store it. And then during the day, when there's light, they take that stored, convert it back to carbon dioxide, run through the Kelvin cycle, and produce sugar. Again, this is an evolutionary strategy. We'll be talking about this second semester again, but I want to introduce it to you now. So, there's the process of photosynthesis in a note kind of